A woman named Elle reached out and she said they are keeping things underground in Kansas, and if those things ever got out, we would be completely screwed as a society. Now, Elle says her ex-husband was very stoic, very mean, and very no-nonsense. He was decorated in the military, and they had been married for 4 years when he finally told her this story. And the only reason he told her was because they were stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic for over 8 hours. She gave me a lot of information so that I was able to verify that he is a real person and did the job that she said that he did. But in order to keep both her and his identities private, all I'm going to tell you is that he joined the military at age 18, and 8 of the years that he was in the service, he spent between Iraq and Afghanistan. Now retired and on 100% disability due to a direct IED hit while paratrooping. So years ago, when Elle and her ex were still married, they were on a road trip to visit a friend in another city, and the trip was supposed to take about 8 hours, but they got caught in bumper-to-bumper traffic, and those 8 hours turned into 20. It was apparently a really bad accident. The highway was completely stopped, and it was so bad that people were parking their cars on the interstate and getting out and talking to each other, sitting on the hoods of their car, hanging out because nobody could go anywhere. Car is off. She says she was always passenger princess and he had been driving during this road trip, but after they had been stuck for several hours, they had a bottle in the trunk. He decided to get a little bit tipsy. She was like, no problem, I can drive. They're not going anywhere soon anyway, so they're sitting there. He starts drinking, he gets a little loose, and that's when he tells her this story that she could not believe, because in all the years that they had known each other, he had never talked any kind of nonsense to her. But he tells her that when he was stationed in Afghanistan, he was like the big boss of his command. I'm sure there's a proper term. I apologize. I'm not familiar with military terminology, but stationed about 20 miles away from Kandahar. And one night he's sleeping and he's awoken by a real life Jason Bourne type figure, as he described it to her. And he does not know this man, but this man instructs him to gather 2 men under his command that he trusts the most. One of the men is going to be escorting him, and the other man is going to act as a watcher to ensure that nobody else at their station knows that these people even left. And Elle's ex tells her that he had heard of these secret men, but he had never believed in them, and he was the highest authority at his post. Meant that there was no commanding officer over him at this post, and he had not approved this Jason Bourne type to enter the post, especially not his personal quarters. But he gathers 2 men, he does what he's told, he instructs soldier number 1 to stay there and keep watch, and soldier number 2 to follow him. That he didn't know what they were getting into, but he knew that something serious was about to go down. They go about 2 miles away, and they are met with 2 other special forces, an Army Ranger and a Navy SEAL, and he found this extremely strange because Navy SEALs are not typically on missions in Afghanistan or Iraq. Elle says she's not aware of this, but this is just what he told her. Anyway, the Army Ranger hands him what is essentially an NDA, but they referred to it as something different. They have him and the soldier that he chose to assist him sign. After they sign the paperwork, they are led to 2 large, special marked cargo, temperature-controlled containers. He recognized because he used to work in logistics as an Army Ranger. He knew that these were used at one point to ship out weaponized viruses. Is expecting something to that effect, I suppose. But they go in and there is a dead giant. Elle's ex was allegedly instructed to remove his personal belongings and take his measurements. Even though he was no longer alive, they also were instructed to ensure that he was securely tied down. Described this giant to Elle as being over 17 feet long with 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. He had red hair, a beard, and was wearing a loincloth that he described to Elle as being similar to what Brendan Fraser wore in Tarzan. Weighed in at over 900 pounds, and he told Elle that he smelled like evil. And Elle remembers saying, evil is not a smell. What does evil smell like? And he said, me trying to explain that to you would be me trying to explain what a painting looks like to someone who was born blind. You would never know the smell unless you smelled it yourself. He told Elle that they also removed a satchel from him that was made of the same material that his loincloth was, which they assumed to be the hide of some kind of animal. Inside the satchel were weapons made from bones and a spear that was made probably from a tree trunk. They then assisted in shipping this cargo container with the dead giant inside to an underground facility in Kansas, where apparently he said they keep a lot of these things. That's when he said, that's not all that's there, but if I told you what was there and if those things ever got out, we would all be effed. Scary Storytime is a series of allegedly true listener-submitted stories. Keep in mind these can come from anyone. None of this story should be taken as absolute fact, but all of these stories are sent in by real people. That said, Elle's name has been changed, but she will be seeing the comments. If you have a story you think nobody would believe, send it in. We'd love to hear it. And I'm putting together a podcast of spooky, scary military stories, so that's why I'm kind of harping on this topic a lot lately.
My coworker asked me why I ignored him this morning. I was still asleep. Welcome back to Creepy Crochet and Creepy Pasta. Let's get into today's scary. Listen, I'm not saying I'm being followed or anything like that, alright? I just want to clear that up front. It's just that weird little incidents have been happening to me recently. Stuff that's easy to brush off on its own, but together it's starting to get under my skin a little. I don't know. Maybe I'm just exhausted. I hope that's what it is. but I'm starting to feel like I don't live alone anymore. For one, when I'll go to lay down to go to sleep, I hear things, you know? Like outside my house or downstairs. Not that that's a big deal or anything, this house has always been like that. Like when I was a kid and I would stay over here with my grandpa, I'd stay up in bed listening to creaking boards or what I thought was some kind of monster scampering around outside. But there'd always be some explanation to it. Raccoons, the wind, late night bathroom trips. That's why I didn't think much of it at first. But the thing is, it feels like that stuff has been happening more often as of late. I mean, I must have lost like 15 hours of sleep in the last week because of this crap. It's not like I'm waiting at my bedroom door holding a bat or anything. I've just always had a hard time sleeping when it's noisy. It also feels like the noises have gotten more, I don't know, specific. The weird thing is it's not even loud most of the time. It's just enough noise for me to pick up on it. It'll be one sound every few minutes. A floorboard downstairs, something brushing against the side of the house. Once I could have sworn I heard one of the cabinet doors in the kitchen tap shut. And every single time I hear something, I end up holding my breath without realizing it. Just sitting there in bed, listening as hard as I can. I've even started checking rooms before I go to sleep, which I know sounds ridiculous. Not because I think somebody's actually in the house or anything, I just feel compelled to do it. I can't even try to sleep before I've swept the whole house. The worst part is that once I'm finally awake enough to go get up and look around, everything always seems completely normal again. No open doors or missing things, nothing moved around, just that feeling that I interrupted something by getting out of bed. But last night, around maybe 2 or 3 in the morning, I heard what sounded like somebody taking one careful step downstairs. Just one. Then nothing for like 5 minutes. Then another one. Then another, and another, and another. It went on like this for what felt like hours. When I couldn't fall back asleep, I just started counting the sounds. 15 creaks. The first thing I did the next morning was count my stairs. 15 steps. My stairs have 15 steps. This freaked the hell out of me. I'd been trying to rationalize all those sounds for days, but this was a pretty big coincidence. Was there someone in my house? If so, why wasn't anything out of place? Nothing was stolen or moved or anything. And how could they have gotten inside? All the windows were normal, and I always triple-checked the locks on my doors, especially as of late. Eventually I told myself that what I heard couldn't have possibly been footsteps. Because why would someone go through all the trouble of breaking into my house just to tiptoe around? If they wanted to hurt me or rob me, they certainly could have. When I was done arguing with myself, I got ready and drove to work. The weather didn't do anything to calm my nerves. The sky was a washed-out shade of gray, and I could just tell it was about to rain. Anyways, I made it to my office and slumped down into my chair. Just as I was about to open my laptop and start working, I saw the shadow of my coworker looming over me. I turned around expecting to hear some small talk or a work question. My coworker, let's call him John Doe for the sake of privacy, always had this big toothy grin on his face. When I turned around to talk to him, he looked like a different person. Sweat was beginning to form on his brow, and he was swaying back and forth nervously. Worst of all, he was frowning. In 3 years of working with John, I can count on my hands the number of times I've seen him frown. "What's wrong, John?" I asked, growing more worried by the second. He cleared his throat before he spoke. "Hey man, you alright?" "Yeah." "I don't know, I saw you this morning and you were acting kind of off." "What are you talking about?" "At the gas station on 35th. "What?" I blurted out, cutting him off. "I was driving past the gas station on 35th Street and I saw you there. You were just walking up and down the street. You know, I rolled down my window and tried to talk to you, but you just ignored me and kept pacing back and forth. You kept ignoring me, so I just gave up and drove away. I was just really weirded out, so when I saw you come in, I figured I'd ask you what the heck that was all about." "John, I wasn't at the gas station today. Hell, I didn't wake up until 7 this morning." You sure?" "Well, I could have sworn it was you." "Well, it wasn't. Gee, I suppose it was pretty dark out. Maybe I need to get my eyes checked." As he said this, his familiar smile creeped back onto his face. "Well, sorry to bother ya," he said as he began walking back to his cubicle. "John," I said. He looked back at me. "What was he wearing?" I asked. "What?" "The man you saw at the gas station. What was he wearing?" "Well, I didn't pay much attention to his outfit, you know." "Oh," he said, his face lighting up. "Now that you mention it, he was wearing an odd hat." "Odd how?" I asked. "Well, it was just a red baseball cap, but it had 1984 on it. Man, I remember reading that book way back in grade school. Not the kind of thing you expect to see on a hat." He turned around and sat down at his desk. I froze. A 1984 hat. My dad gave me a hat just like that when I was in high school. I've never seen another one like it. I basically sleptwalked through the rest of the day. My head was swimming with questions. When I finally got home, I went through my entire house. Everything was in its place, except for one thing, my hat. I always hang my 1984 hat on the second coat hook from my back door. Always. But when I checked that room, the hat was hanging slightly out of place. It was on the hook closest to the door. I checked the inside band. There was a receipt folded into it from the gas station on 35th Street. Time, 4:12 a.m.
What if you found 2 old tapes in your dead grandfather's house and one of them was labeled "She's Lying"? This is Scared with Jess, and today's story is about a woman, a hatchet, and a house that learned voices. After my grandfather died, my mom, my aunt, and I had to clean out his house. It was this old 2-story place out in Missouri where he had lived alone for years after my grandmother died. A few days after the funeral, I was up in the attic going through boxes when I found 2 old VHS tapes in a plastic bin under a bunch of old junk. One was plain and the other had "She's Lying" written across the front in black marker. That was weird enough that I brought them home instead of throwing them away. A friend let me borrow an old VCR, and a couple days later I went back to my grandfather's house alone to watch them. I played the plain tape first. It started with static and then settled on footage from inside the house at night. The upstairs hallway. The camera was handheld, shaking a little, and I could hear a woman breathing behind it. And then she whispered, "Please stop following me." The camera turned too fast, it caught the hallway again, and there was a woman standing at the far end with a hatchet in one hand. She had long dark hair and bare feet in a pale nightgown. The camera shook like the person filming stumbled. And then the woman with the hatchet said, "I told you not to listen to it." And the tape cut to static. At first I thought maybe it was staged, some weird old home project. And then I played the second tape, the one that said "She's Lying." This one opened on a fixed shot of the kitchen at night. It was the same house and the same night, I think. A few seconds in, the same woman walked into frame. No hatchet yet. She was checking the back door, looking into the hallway, and clearly scared of something. And then behind her in the dining room doorway, something moved. Not clearly enough to make out a face, just a darker shape crossing where nothing should have been. She spun around so fast she nearly slipped, and backed out of the frame, and the tape jumped. Next clip, it was the living room, and this time she had the hatchet, and she was crying. Not loud, but just standing there near the stairs with tears on her face, gripping the handle and looking up toward the second floor. And then she said, "You're making it sound like me." And from upstairs through all the tape hiss came her own voice saying, "Come up here." That was when I stopped thinking of any of it as fake. The tape jumped again, and this time it was the upstairs hallway. Same window at the end, and the same strip of moonlight. Only now the camera wasn't being carried. It was set low somewhere off to the side, aimed down the hall. And the hallway stayed empty for a few seconds. And then the woman entered from the left with the hatchet. She moved slowly, checking each doorway as she passed, and then she stopped. And from somewhere behind the camera, or maybe one of the other rooms, her own voice said softly, "You're recording the wrong one." She turned towards the sound, and that was when I saw her face clearly for the first time. It was my grandmother, young but unmistakably her. And then it got worse. She was standing at the end of the hallway in the strip of moonlight coming through the window. So the camera caught her body mostly in the shadow, and the hatchet hanging low in one hand, and enough light on her face to show that her eyes were completely black. And she was smiling. And then she noticed whoever was filming. She started sprinting towards the camera, fast enough that you expect her to burst fully into the frame. But instead, she disappeared into the pitch black part of the hallway before she reached it. And there was 1 second where the person filming was breathing hard, and the camera was shaking, and nothing was visible. And then she reappeared. Not running now. She was slowly tiptoeing towards the camera from the dark, still smiling. And then her body twitched sharply, wrong and sudden, and she jerked sideways back into the darkness again. And from out of that black, she said, I'll wait for you out here. And then the tape cut off. I sat there staring at static for I don't know how long. And then I rewound both tapes and watched them again. And the more I watched them, the worse they got. Because the first tape makes it look like my grandmother is the threat. But the second tape makes it obvious that something else was in the house first. Something using her voice, or following her, or trying to make her look like the liar. And that night, I called my mom and asked if anything had ever happened in the house before I was born. And she got really quiet. And then she told me my grandmother used to say the house learned voices. That was her exact phrase. She said there were nights when Grandma swore she heard people calling from empty rooms, and sometimes my mom's voice, or my grandpa's. Once she said her own voice from upstairs while she was standing in the kitchen. And then my mom told me that one night when she was 14, my grandmother locked every bedroom door from outside and sat in the upstairs hallway until morning because she said something was in the house and had learned my mother's voice and was trying to get her to come out. I asked my mom why she never told me any of that, and she said because it sounded crazy. And then she asked if I was still in the house. I lied and said no, but I was. And right after that, I heard footsteps upstairs. Very light, but just enough. And then I heard my own voice from the second floor say, "Come up here." I dropped the phone and ran out of that house so fast I left the VCR on and the front door hanging open behind me. Later, after I digitized the tapes, I found something else hidden in the footage. In the first tape, there's a moment where you can see a second woman standing in one of the bedroom doorways. Not my grandmother, just a face and one shoulder in the dark, watching both of them. And in the second tape, right before my grandmother starts sprinting down that moonlit hallway, you can hear the first woman whisper near the camera, "She already sounds like me." I still don't know which woman wrote "she's lying" on the tape, and I still don't know which one my grandfather believed. Anyway, good luck sleeping tonight.
This dwende story chills. I have chills. Also, these are my earrings. You can't see them because my earlobes suck. This lady says that when her youngest daughter was 4 years old, she had an imaginary friend. Her daughter would describe him as like this little tiny old man with a really long beard. Now, her husband would tell her that he thinks that imaginary friend was a duende. She did think that it was weird that her daughter would describe her imaginary friend as like this little tiny old man with a beard, but she didn't want to give it that much importance. Important. Now, the girl telling the story says that her mom would tell her that when she was younger, she also had a duende, that she would tell her mom that this little man would pull her hair and make her cry, so she was always terrified of sleeping by herself. Now, she says that she doesn't remember any of it, but she is very much scared of duendes and things of that sort. She was so scared of this topic that she ended up asking her husband, the girl's older sisters, even her mom to talk to that girl because she just didn't want to entertain that conversation. It really did scare her. She went as far as to ask them to like maybe show her a different cartoon, show her like different movies so that maybe this imaginary friend would change and not be like this little old man she's describing, because obviously it sounds like a duende. She knows that it's silly and she sounds so stupid, but like she couldn't handle listening to her daughter like talk about this imaginary friend. Like she couldn't deal with it anymore. It would scare her so much. So there was one day where her and her husband were in the living room and the daughter was in her bedroom that she shared with her siblings, but she was in there by herself. The rest of her daughters were outside, so it was just mom and dad and daughter all alone in that house. And out of nowhere is when they hear like somebody slap somebody really hard. After hearing that slap, they hear that the daughter is crying in the bedroom, so they both get up and go run into her room. When they look at her, they say that there was like a tiny handprint on her cheek. They could tell that she got slapped really hard because her cheek was all red in that little handprint, but they know that it wasn't their other daughters because they could literally see them through the window. There was nobody else that could have slapped her, and when the girl finally calmed down from crying, she tells her parents that it was her friend. She tells them that he got mad and slapped her, and they didn't know what to say or do other than to tell her that they believed her. They told her that they would take care of her and that they would make sure that her friend wouldn't hurt her again. Now, she said that she had never been so scared in her life other than that night. They ended up letting her sleep with them. She remembers laying in bed next to her daughter, and like any little sound that she would hear would like startle her. She would be so scared. And thankfully, nothing happened throughout the night. The daughter also said that she would not be playing with him if he showed up again. She finally got over everything that happened, and with time, she completely forgot about her imaginary friend. Or at least that is what the mom thought. Her daughter is now 8 years old, and she doesn't remember how the topic of the conversation came up of her imaginary friend, that little old man. They started talking about how she got slapped, and in the dinner table with everybody around, she started to tell them why her friend had slapped her. Apparently, her friend told her that she didn't look like her mom because she wasn't a crybaby. That is when her daughter told her friend to shut up and not to be talking bad about her mom. When she says this, she says that her friend started laughing and that made her really mad. Not only did this friend continue to laugh, but then he kept saying, "Your mom's a crybaby, your mom's a crybaby." And that is when her daughter tried to hit her friend for making fun of the mom. When she went to swing at this thing, which by the way, go you, because yeah, what the fuck, don't be talking shit about my mom. He was no longer there, totally missed, and apparently he popped up again next to her, but this time he wasn't the little old man. It was almost as he grew to be as tall as her. She explains that she had never seen her imaginary friend grow that tall just to slap her, and after he slaps her, he runs and almost gets smaller and smaller and got underneath the dresser. She described it as like, you know, like if you see a rat run and try to like squeeze into a space that knows nobody can get through, that is what the imaginary friend did, and that is what it looked like. From underneath the dresser, he popped his head out and tells the little girl that he was gonna come for her, and that is when, you know, mom and dad walk in and they're like, what the fuck happened, because they heard the slap, and she was crying. The daughter had also mentioned that he just kept talking shit about her mom, like saying other things, and that's when finally the mom was like, well, what was he saying about me that made you so angry? Her daughter tells her that the duende was telling her how he used to pull her mom's hair when she was little, and that her mom would cry and he would be so happy just messing with her. Oh my god. She remembers dropping her fork as soon as she heard her daughter say that. She started shaking. She was so scared because there's no way that her daughter would have known that. Her mom had told her that, you know, a while ago wasn't something that she would go around talking about again. She's terrified of duendes. So how the fuck did her daughter know? And was this duende the same duende that had messed with her when she was a kid? Now she says that her husband, like, he wasn't the kind of person that would be so scared easily or anything like that, but there was something that their daughter mentioned that did scare him so much when she said it. There was something that this friend had told the daughter that the daughter told the dad without the mom hearing, because she knew how scared her mom was at that point. Her friend, the duende, had told her that he was gonna come back while her mom and her were asleep, but that he never told her when he was gonna come back. Her daughter, even at 8 years old now, goes to bed every night in fear that that is the night where her friend will return. And that is how it ends. And you want to know why? Because this happened 2 weeks ago. This conversation at the dinner table happened 2 weeks ago. Like, fuck, I would not be able to sleep after that. What do you guys think?
If I've said it once, I'll say it again. But if there is something running at me and I can't physically see it, I am packing my things and moving immediately. And with that being said, let's jump right into tonight's story. So grab your favorite tea and settle in, and let me tell you another scary Appalachian story, because of course, this is Tea After Midnight. This story comes from Liv. Hi Savannah, my name is Liv, and I am a huge fan of Tea After Midnight and wanted to contribute some stories from my childhood home in West Virginia. Of course, all names are changed except my own for others' privacy. I was born in Wisconsin but moved to West Virginia when I was 6. Because of that, I did not learn Appalachian etiquette until I was much older. However, I had at least heard of creepy tales about creatures and unexplainable circumstances from places deep in the woods. My home was in a decently populated area with houses neighboring ours, lit street lamps, and little traffic. Not the usual place of Appalachian horror stories. Directly across the street was a small patch of woods. I thought because it was not a huge forest, it wouldn't count as an area needing supernatural precautions. Needless to say, I was very, very wrong. My sister Emily and I would sometimes walk the trek of woods from one end to the other. It started down the end of our street, and there was a well-trodden path that led all the way to the other side. It was relatively straight, but one side of the trail steeply plummeted into a creek at the bottom. The other side was a steep incline headed upwards to the top of the hill. So the only way to safely traverse the woods was this trail. At the time of this incident, I was 8 and she was 10. We were walking as we usually did when we heard running footsteps behind us, crunching on the leaves. It was uncommon but not unusual for us to interact with others in these woods. So we turned and stepped to the side to let them pass. Only there was no one in sight. Emily looked at me concerned and we laughed it off, thinking it was probably a squirrel. Continuing onward, we walked for a few minutes before we heard it again. It sounded like heavy stomps, moving quickly like it was lightly running. We looked at each other and I glanced behind us to see if it was a person, but again, no one was there. An uneasy feeling crept up the back of my neck. I asked Emily if we could turn around and go back home since that direction was shorter from where we were. Emily shook her head and whispered that we should keep moving forward. Heading toward the unusual is what idiots in horror movies did, so we continued on. Since we were both young, unsupervised girls alone in the woods, my sister always brought our father's pocket knife with us. She took it out and opened it up, putting her free hand in mine. As we continued walking, we noticed that the sky was getting dark. It was only 1 or 2 in the afternoon when we started our hike, so the sun setting should be hours away. The uneasy feeling grew stronger, and the usual noise of the woods had gone very, very quiet. Concerned, Emily clutched my hand tighter, and we started walking so fast I almost had to run. That is when I heard what I thought was my father's voice shout my name from behind us. I went to turn, but my sister dragged me forward. Then I heard the running footsteps again, heavy and sounding like a large person was running full speed at us. Scared, we both started running as fast as we could to get to the end. I glanced back to see the fallen leaves shift and crunch in time with the running steps, but there was no figure making them. We made it out of the woods and collapsed in the parking lot. The sky brightened and the noise of the woods returned, and the footsteps behind us were gone. Needless to say, we never went back into those woods without our parents or our brother. After that instance, though, strange things started happening inside the house. Over the years, there were mysteriously moved items, flickering lights, strange handprints on the second floor windows, dead animals on the porch, and strange creaks on the stairs. My parents never believed or saw any of these things, and they would always disappear or be normal when brought to their attention. After a while, Emily just started avoiding places in the house and eventually forgot about these things. Yes, I asked her about them, and yes, I tried to explain, but she would just shake her head and tell me not to scare her and go about her day. Fast forward years later when I moved out at 18. I lived in 2 different places over the next few years with minimal supernatural experiences. A few months ago, my washer had broke, and I went over to my parents to wash my laundry. Their washer and dryer are in the basement. You have to go down the stairs and to the left around a wall to get to the laundry hallway. At the bottom of the steps to the right, there is a makeshift wall using a refrigerator box to make a room for my younger brother. He likes to decorate with LED lights and has all sorts of cologne, shoes, and electronics. I say this because he always sprays his cologne so the basement smells nice and keeps his LEDs on either white or yellow settings. Another important detail is that me and my siblings had always agreed to skip the top step when going up or down the stairs. It made a loud, distinct creaking noise any time there was pressure on it. That was our childish way of knowing if it was our parents on the stairs or someone we didn't know. This time, when I went to carry my dirty laundry downstairs, I noticed a dull red glow. I thought that was unusual, but not impossible if my brother wanted low light. I called his name, but there was no response. He was not home, and neither were my parents. I felt an eerie feeling creep up my neck. I shrugged and walked downstairs while skipping the top step. As I got closer to the end of the steps, I smelled a rancid, suffocating smell. The best way to describe it is if there were rotting leaves and mold in a bag in your face. Very strange, but I went ahead around the corner and the smell went away. I shoved my phone in my pocket and turned off the hallway light, leaving just the dull red LEDs glowing to guide me. Immediately, I had the strongest urge to run. I was confused as to why, so I quickly went around the corner and up the steps. I get to the top step and skip it to stand in the door frame. Suddenly, I hear stomping footsteps behind me running up as fast as it can, and the distinct creak of the top step being touched. I whirled around while backing up to close the door on whoever or whatever was behind me, but there was nothing. I felt the immense feeling that I was unwanted, and I ran for the front door. I went out and locked it with shaking hands and darted to my car. Nothing seemed to have followed me, but I kept repeating under my breath, "You are not welcome to follow me. You have to stay here." I felt relieved after I was outside and started backing out of the driveway. That's when I glanced up at the living room window, a giant clear square that was easy to see from the floor below. A figure, dark and featureless but too tall to be any of my family, was standing in the center. I panicked and tried to grab a picture, but it disappeared as soon as I looked away. I planned to never go back to that house alone ever again. So guys, I know we have an episode where somebody had sent me a story where something was running full speed at them, but they couldn't see it. And like I said in that episode, if that ever happened to me, I would be packing up and moving immediately. Because these type of stories freak me out the most. I think, honestly, I would rather have something that I could physically see, like a creature or whatever it is, running at me because I know what it is, I know the threat, but something that I can't see running at me, that freaks me out the most. So Liv, if you're watching this video, if you wouldn't care to let us know, if your family still lives there, do they experience anything? And did you ever tell them about what you experienced? And anybody in the comments that has any idea of what this could be, please let us know, because I don't personally know of any creature or anything like that that you can't see but you can hear running at you. My thought would be that this is an entity, but again, I could be wrong, so you guys let me know what you think this could be. But that does conclude this episode of Tea After Midnight. If you have any personal scary stories you want to share, I would love to read them. You can email me at the email on the screen or the email in the caption of this video. But as always, you guys, thank you so much for being here. I love you so much. I hope you have the best night, and I'll catch you in the next one. Bye.
Boy oh boy, do I have a creepy story. You might need to sleep with the lights turned on tonight after this one. So this happened to a mum and her two young boys. Well, it really only happened to one of the boys. At the time, they were living in a property that was very, very isolated from their friends and family, and also from the rest of the world. They had just escaped from an abusive man, like unfortunately too many women and children have to do. So they were completely cut off and isolated from the rest of the world. But the mum said at the time they needed that because she just needed to focus on becoming a family and getting happiness back into their life. So this property was like 2.5 hours away from their family and friends, but also like 35 minutes away from the rest of civilization, like the nearest grocery store and the police station. It was quite a large property, quite old. She got it at an absolute bargain price from the landlord, and he just said to her, just keep the place clean because after you're done with it, I plan to sell it. The first 3 weeks, she says, were just like heaven on earth. The boys were laughing, they were happy, and she says this is what she imagined her family life would be, just happy children, happy life, and they just loved spending their summer together. But all of a sudden, her oldest son, who we'll call Michael, started to act strange, to say the least. It started with nightmares. He would get very bad nightmares that would often make him wake up screaming, shouting for his mum. He would wake up shaking, and sometimes he'd even wet the bed. At first, he would say that somebody was in his bedroom. The mum would reassure him that nobody was in the bedroom. They were safe. They were all alone. And she just thought this was his body's natural reaction to witnessing everything he had at such a young age. However, these nightmares didn't stop when she hoped that they would. And one day, something, in my opinion, really creepy happened. One day she was making dinner and she called her eldest son Michael to the table and he didn't respond. She called again, he didn't respond, which was unlike him. He was usually quite a good boy and she wouldn't have to tell him twice to do anything. Something to mention, his mum and his youngest brother, who was 3, would sleep on the top floor and Michael had a downstairs bedroom. So she approached his door to come and tell him to come to the kitchen table, but then she was stopped in her tracks because she heard him speaking to somebody. She says that he was whispering in quite an aggressive tone, and she knows that she heard a second voice. This second voice was a lot deeper and much older, and it was a male voice. She obviously panics and barges into his bedroom, and that's when she sees Michael half under the bed. His head and his arms are under the bed, his legs are sticking out, and as soon as his mum comes into the room, he backs out, he scuttles out, and she says, "Who's there? Who are you talking to?" And he says, "I'm not talking to anybody. I was just looking for something." She says, "Like, I swear I heard another voice. Who was you talking to?" And he said, "No, it was just me. I was just talking to myself." She, for some reason, believes him and thinks this is just a product, again, of what he's been through and what he's seen. More weeks pass, and she catches Michael talking to himself in the evening in his bedroom quite often, always adamant that nobody's there, and again she thinks that it is him doing it. His nightmares don't stop, but now when she comes downstairs to check on him, he just says, "I'm fine, just leave me alone." So she does that. She thinks that he's growing up too quickly because he starts acting like a teenager. He starts spending a lot of time in his bedroom, starts being really stroppy, and also she's noticing that he's staying up past his bedtime. He doesn't really want to take part in any activities that his mum and his brother are doing. But also she's noticing that he's like waking up in the night. She can hear the shower on, she can hear the fridge door open, sometimes she can hear the microwave beep, and also the cutlery drawer. She says that it's usually he cleans up after himself, like sometimes he would leave like the odd wrapper on the side, but one morning she wakes up and the kitchen is just an entire mess. Like, cupboard doors are open, cans are just like poured over the side, like he's just opened it and poured it everywhere, cereal all over the floor. She wakes him up and she's really angry at him. She's like, "This isn't our house, we're supposed to look after it, you need to respect somebody else's home, we rent this place." And he starts telling her, "It's not me, Mum, I'm not the one doing it." And she says, "Well, who else is it going to be?" And he says, "I'm too scared to tell you who it is," which makes the mum panic for a moment because she thinks, is it her ex-husband? Has he found where they are? And is he the one that's talking to Michael? His mum is then on high alert and she really doesn't sleep. One night she wakes up to hear Michael screaming. She runs down the stairs and she hears a male voice say "shush" really loud. She barges into his bedroom. No one's there. Michael is up and she says, "You need to tell me who you're talking to, Michael. We don't have secrets anymore. Who are you talking to?" And again he says, "I can't tell you who I'm talking to because I don't know if they're real." I would be out of that house straight away. What this mum does instead is she calls her mum the next day and her mum says, "I think you need to get him to talk to somebody because he's clearly struggling." The following week, he's booked in to see a therapist, and after the appointment, she says he's seen a lot of dark stuff. "I think he's holding back on something. I want to regularly see him." But she also says, "I want you to have a family sleepover in his bedroom." She says there's something about his bedroom that he doesn't like. "I want you and your son, your youngest son, to spend the night in that bedroom with him just to reassure him that everything's fine." So that evening, the mum says, "Hey, we're going to all have a family sleepover tonight." And Michael's like, "No, Mum, please, no, Mum, I don't want you and my brother in here." She says, "It's going to be fun. You know, we'll watch a movie, we'll stay up late, and we'll all put mattresses in your bedroom and we'll have fun." Michael doesn't really want her to do this, but she does it anyway. When Michael and her youngest boy fall asleep, she turns the TV off and she just lays there. And she has a feeling that something's going to happen. She says she doesn't know what it is, but she's getting like a sense, like the hair on the back of her neck is standing up. Then says that she can hear like scuttling and something like chains moving from under the floor. She hears a floorboard creak, which makes her stand up, and she hears a voice say, "I know you want to see me. Why don't you come and take a look for yourself?" I'm sorry, what? This mum doesn't investigate. She takes her and her sons and she leaves that house. She drives the 2.5 hours to her parents' house and says, "There's someone in my house. There's someone there. I heard them speak. They're under Michael's bed. The following day, her brother and her dad go to the property and they flip Michael's bedroom upside down. Underneath his bed are several loose floorboards. When they lift up the floorboards, they see a mattress, clothes, bedding, and various food items. But nobody is in sight. Nobody's there. They contact the police, they contact the landlord, and the landlord says, I've never had any problems in that house. I lived in that house for many, many years. The police say it might have been a homeless man that was in and out of the woods. Something that mother did, I've got goosebumps talking about this, something that mother did was never go back to that house. She left everything in that property and said that she needed to start again. Can you imagine having to leave an abusive man to then go to a property where there is another creepy man? I also forgot to mention that on several mornings, Michael would wake up with bite marks on his arm. Michael never really spoke about what happened, but he did say that he was very angry at his mum for a long time for putting him in a situation where he was in danger again, which is so sad. So sad. Thankfully now, though, they have a really happy relationship and everything went smooth with them as they grow older. But wild men, am I right?
This story has to do with a little boy who went missing in the Appalachian Mountains, and when they found him, he wasn't the same. I originally heard the story in Spanish. I'm going to go ahead and translate it to English and tag the original person right down here. The story was originally submitted by the mom. So the little boy's name is Matthew. So Matthew's mom says that her and her family went camping. They went camping in the Appalachian Mountains. They rented an RV and they spent the whole weekend out there. Everything was perfectly fine. On the last day, as they're getting ready to pack up and leave, Matthew kind of wanders off. She doesn't think much of it. She's thinking that maybe he's just like going to be nearby. As they were getting ready to leave, they start to call for Matthew to come back because they're leaving, and Matthew is nowhere to be found. They start kind of panicking at this point because no one has really seen Matthew in a while, and he's a little boy. As time goes on, they get more and more nervous, and they decide to call the park rangers. Park rangers show up with volunteers and start getting ready to like comb the surrounding areas because they're like, where could this little boy have gone? Just when they're getting ready to literally lose it, Matthew just very calmly walks out from like the woods towards them. One thing that the mom says is that the moment she saw Matthew, she was relieved, but at the same time, something about him felt off. She said that she knows her son very well. He has always been terrified of everything. He's afraid of the dark. He's afraid of bugs. He's afraid of spiders. Like any little thing like that freaks him out. So she can't understand why Matthew wandered off on his own in the first place and how he came back so calmly. Regardless, everything's okay. Matthew has been found. They get home, and she says when they get home is when the real like terror begins. On the way home, while they were sitting in the RV, Matthew was acting extremely strange. The mom says that Matthew would just kind of stand there or like sit there and stare out the window, almost like he was like contemplating like his whole life existence, that he went from being like a child, like a little boy, to now he's this mature, like old man. He was extremely sophisticated. The mom says that from that day is the day that her son's childhood got ripped away from him. Once they get home, the first thing that Matthew says to his mom is, "Mom, I'm gonna go take a shower, I'm going to bed." Mind you, Matthew has always needed his mom for everything, but he went and took a shower and went to lay down. When the mom went in to kind of tuck him in, Matthew looked at her and said, "Can you take that nightlight out of here?" The mom was a little confused because Matthew has always been afraid of the dark, but this Matthew wanted nothing to do with that nightlight. So she took it with him, and then she says that Matthew went and put both his arms on his chest, like crossed, and he just like laid down and went to sleep. As the weeks go by, Matthew's behavior continues to change. Though a lot of times they'll just find him in his room staring out the window, or they'll see him picking up like random objects from the house, like a cup or a plate, and he'll just be looking at it like as if he's never seen a cup or a plate before. The mom starts to talk to the husband about all of this, all of her concerns. She's pretty much like, "That's my son. That's physically my son. It looks like my son, but that's not my son." Then they get a call from the school. They're thinking, great, the school's gonna call and complain about his behavior. Matthew apparently had always struggled with math, so when they called the parents into the school, the teacher was actually praising Matthew, saying how intelligent he was, that he was like a straight A student, that he shouldn't even be in second grade because he was so intelligent, which the parents were like, this is not the Matthew that we knew from like a couple weeks ago. Who is this? They then decided to take him to go see a therapist. The therapist, every single therapist that Matthew went to would say there's absolutely nothing wrong with Matthew. Matthew's great. He's so intelligent. He's so like well-educated, like praising Matthew. This leaves the parents even more confused because remember, before all of this, Matthew was your average second grader. The way that these therapists and the teachers and everything are describing him, they're describing him as this very mature, like sophisticated, like super educated man. They're talking about their second grader, who's what, like, how old are you in second grade, like 7 or 8? More time goes on, and the mom's name is Laura. Laura figures something out that literally, like, sends chills down her spine. She finds out that her son Matthew does not sleep at night. He stays up all night talking to someone in his room. There's been many nights where she'll go check up on him and she would hear him talking to someone. And then when it gets close to like 6 a.m., he lays down in bed in that same position and pretends to be asleep all night. But still, there's nothing they can really do about it. Like the parents, Laura and her husband, talk about it, but there's nothing they can do. Until one night, Laura is home alone with Matthew. Matthew's in the kitchen coloring. She said there were times where like he would act like a regular kid, but then there would be other times where he would act like this adult. So that night, Laura's in the kitchen cooking, Matthew is coloring, and she notices that Matthew's looking at her, like smiling at her, but like a very weird, like menacing smile. And Laura finally goes up to him and is like, Matthew, like what's going on with you? Like what's different? Like talk to me, what happened? Matthew just sits there and continues to kind of smile at her with that weird menacing smile. And then Laura decides to ask something that she wishes she had never asked, but she went ahead and asked Matthew. She goes, where is my son? What happened to Matthew? And her son Matthew responded with, Matthew's perfectly safe, playing in the woods. He's very happy. You don't have to worry about him. She's of course terrified by this answer and goes to her husband and talks, and they're freaking out. To them, it's confirmed that this little boy living in their house is not their son. That's not Matthew. Matthew's still out in the woods. So then who's this little boy? Like, what are they gonna do with this little boy? They can't get rid of the little boy. They can't abandon him. They can't do anything to this little boy. Everyone's gonna think that they're crazy, or they're like, you know, literally going insane. Like they can't do anything to this little boy, but they don't know what to do to try to figure out what actually happened to their son. It's been months since all of this happened, and Laura says that there's times where the little boy behaves like her son, and she gets a little glimpse of hope, like, oh, maybe this is all in my head, maybe this is actually my son. And then other things will happen when she's like, that's definitely not my son, I don't know who that is. And that's literally where the story ends. As Laura is writing the story out, or like texting the story, emailing the story out, she writes how as she's typing out the story, Matthew is currently in his room pretending to be asleep. What would you do in that situation?